On our newscast this evening, a $40 billion growth package is introduced by Korea's new economic team. It's meant to improve various sectors of the Korean economy. Well, 100 days have passed since the tragic Sewol-ho ferry accident. During that span, investigations unveiled corruption and safety deficiencies that stayed under the radar for too long. And a passenger plane fails to make an emergency landing in Taiwan, killing at least 48 people. Contrary to initial reports, weather conditions may not have been a factor in the accident. We have these and more coming up on Early Edition at 6.
I see trees of green, red roses.
늘 남편 먼저,
I see them
늘 자식 먼저.
for me and
레이디 퍼스트라는 말을 믿고 살아온 당신. 오늘만큼은 세상 누구보다 당신이 먼저입니다. 한 분 한 분 특별하게 모시겠습니다.
Excellence in Flight, Korean Air.
It is 5 a.m. in New York, 5 p.m. in Taipei, and 6 p.m. on Thursday, the 24th of July here. Live from Seoul, I'm Moon Geunhye.
And I'm Daniel Che. Thank you for joining us. The nation's new economic team, led by Finance Minister Park Geunhye, has unveiled stimulus plans this Thursday to breathe life into the sputtering economy.
Government spending would increase by $11.4 billion and another $28 billion would be available for SMEs through loans and other financial support. First, here's our Park Geunhye.
Korea's new economic team is all geared up to shake the country out of its low-growth rut. Finance Minister Park Geunhye said Thursday that the government will seek aggressive fiscal policies that will boost spending by some 12 trillion won or roughly $11 billion in the second half of this year. The government will also set aside around $28 billion in loans and funds to promote corporate activities.
To solve structural problems the economy is now facing and to maintain fiscal balance in the long term, it's critical to seek expansionary fiscal and monetary policies, even at the risk of running a short-term fiscal deficit.
Che says the earnings of local exporters are not flowing into households, which is stifling domestic demand. To address the issue, the government laid out plans to provide tax incentives to companies that raise wages and increase dividend payments.
Korean companies' dividend payout ratio is the lowest among OECD nations. That's affecting the local capital market and keeping corporate earnings from flowing into households.
The government, on the other hand, will tax companies that shy away from investment wage increases or dividend payments in favor of hanging on to excessive cash reserves. The government also plans to accelerate regulatory reforms, especially those linked to bolstering the nation's real estate market by giving homebuyers easier access to mortgage loans. The set of measures is based on the new economic team's revised growth outlook for this year. It cut its growth forecast to 3.7%, down 0.4 percentage points from an earlier projection. The government says that the key to getting the economy back in a full recovery phase is boosting domestic demand, which was hit hard by the ferry tragedy in April. Hwang-ji-hye, Arirang News.
Well, this stimulus package was reported to President Park Geunhye during a ministerial meeting today.
And during the meeting, the Korean president also highlighted the need to cut out the red tape that has been deterring domestic investment. Stressing the urgent need to revitalize the economy following April's ferry disaster, the president said a task force should be established to remove unnecessary regulations to create jobs, specifically in medicine, tourism, and finance. President Park also asked her officials to seek to expand and improve the current retirement pension system.
Now, on public sector reforms, President Park talked about removing each organization's excessive functions to bring down their debt level. Of course, this ambitious stimulus package is designed to pump life into the sluggish Korean economy, and we have numbers to prove it. Korea's economic growth hit its lowest level in 3 quarters in the April to June period this year.
The Bank of Korea says Korea's economic growth slowed to 3.6% in the second quarter over a year earlier. From the previous quarter, it expanded 0.6%, the slowest pace in more than a year. Our Kim Ji-yeon has more.
Korea's economic growth took a step backward in the second quarter of the year. The Bank of Korea says gross domestic product increased 0.6% during the April to June period from the previous quarter. That's 0.1 percentage point lower than the central bank's earlier estimate for the second quarter. Central bank officials say growth was hampered by April's Sewol-ho disaster that dampened domestic demand. Private spending was cut by 0.3%.
Due to Sewol-ho ferry disaster, the government could not enforce budgetary matters on schedule. And also there is poor spending sentiment among major participants of the economy. It wasn't more than we thought it would. We will have to wait and see how long the sentiment will continue to affect the economy.
The central bank adds, however, the Korean economy is modestly recovering with rising exports and improving investment. Fueled by a surge in shipments of LCD displays and chemical goods, exports increased 1.9% from the previous quarter. Construction investment inched up 0.6%, while investments in machinery and transportation equipment gained 1.3%. An analyst from Seoul-based Investment and Security says the economy will pick up in third quarter.
The Sewol-ho incident dragged down domestic demand at the end of April and May, but it stopped affecting consumption in June. GDP growth in the third quarter is expected to recover by up to 0.9 or 1%.
The analyst said he believes Korea's GDP in the third quarter could rise up to 4% compared to the same period last year. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
Now let's get some expert analysis on the Korean government's latest stimulus package.
Well, joining us live in the studio is Dr. Yang Jun-seok, professor of economics at the Catholic University of Korea.
Professor Yang, welcome back to the studio.
Happy to be here.
Right. First, your overall impression of the new economic team's grand growth package. Which ones do you think will prove to be the most effective and which ones perhaps less?
Okay, well, overall, it's a very active, very expansionary package. Some of it has very good economic basis. Some of it, I think, is promising, fulfilling the promise that what they made politically. Now, as far as the policies that I like, it's actually hidden in the large report. But they have something called, they have a $5 trillion safety fund. And what they're going to use that safety fund for is to encourage private companies to help improve Korea's infrastructure. The older infrastructure, they will try something called rehabilitate, transfer, and lease, or rehabilitate, transfer, and operate, which means, well, it's like the build, operate, transfer contract where a private company comes in, they improve the old infrastructure, and then they're allowed to operate it for a certain amount of time to recoup their investment. And there's a $5 trillion won fund to help carry out this rehabilitation. So that's a very good way, I think, to use the private sector to help improve the older infrastructure, which is falling apart or in danger of falling apart. So I think this is very good economic policy, especially in light of the what we've seen in the Sewol incident and some of the infrastructure which are falling apart. Also, I think they have a lot of funds set aside for accelerated depreciation for companies, which are usually effective in trying to get companies to invest more. They also have some policies which really made the news, the LTVs and DTIs. I personally don't think that they'll have as big an effect as the government hopes that they will have. I think a lot of people will use it to get additional loans rather than trying to buy a new apartment, but it may help spending somewhat. But I do like the fact that they've unified the rates. Before they had different rates for Seoul, different rates for the outside Seoul. They had rates for commercial banks, rates for savings banks, and they now unified it. So I do like that aspect.
It's set at 60%, I believe, is it?
It's set for, the LTV, I believe, is set for 75%, and DTI is set for, I think, 60%.
Right, right.
And then there's taxes on retained earnings, the cash that the companies keep. The government's intent is, instead of the company keeping all this cash, they will use it for dividends or increased wages, so that they would actually spur spending, either private consumption or investment. I'm not quite sure whether that will be successful, because in order to avoid taxes, they might just send the investment overseas or the cash overseas. So if there's no good investment opportunities to begin with, then I'm not quite sure why they think that the companies will give this out in dividends. So that I'm not too optimistic on. Also, the incentive there's a lot of incentive to change part-time workers into full-time workers. That's been tried before. And I think we can expect similar effect as before, which is it's working, but maybe not as well as...
It was mediocre,
yeah.
right.
And I think that will probably continue. It's better than nothing, but still, I don't think you could expect too much from it.
What was good is that they did not try to give the people what they want, but explain in detail their plans. And it really sounded like they worked out all the little nooks and crannies, and that's what you liked about the plan. But of course, they did also announce they lowered Korea's economic growth forecast to 3.7%. Not much of a surprise there, right?
Yeah, I mean, at the beginning of the year when they made all these projections, the Bank of Korea projection and the government projection was on the very much higher side. The international organizations was in the mid 3% range. The private Korean research institutions were on the lower 3% range. So I think government was perhaps too optimistic when they made these projections, and they're aligning it more realistically, coupled with the actual fall in consumption right after the Sewol incident.
Well, you know, I think the stimulus package has gained, support from most economists around this country, but some are voicing concerns that it may be too focused on the domestic economy and thereby neglecting the export side of the Korean economy. What's your take on that?
Okay, well, I think exports has been doing well. Not as good as we hope, but still surprisingly well given the changes in exchange rates and the changing conditions in the international economy. And the big villain for the economic slowdown has usually been seen as domestic consumption and investment rather than exports. So I think this is a chance for Korea to maybe focus away from exports a bit and try to concentrate on the domestic economy. What I am worried about, though, perhaps more than not paying too much attention to exports, is a very good chance of increasing the government deficit and the household debt. I think that is a serious risk that we are running here. I think the big difference between this current economic team and the last one is that they are willing to take this risk.
Well, Dr. Yang Jun-seok, Professor of Economics at Catholic University of Korea, thank you so much for your time, and always great to have you providing us with some refreshing insights on the matter.
Thank you for having me.
Digging deeper, getting to the bottom of stories that impact your life. Talking with you on air and online, connecting you with experts on the world's most pressing issues. News and current affairs at its best, with Moon Gon-young and Daniel Che on Early Edition at 6.
It's been 100 days already since this country was struck by one of the worst maritime disasters in history.
A passenger ferry with nearly 500 people on board capsized and sank in waters off Korea's southwestern coast, taking down with it more than 300 lives. What the ferry disaster revealed are also loopholes in the nation's safety management system and widespread corruption in this society.
As our UDN reports, more than 3 months out, there are more questions than answers regarding the ferry disaster.
It's been 100 days since their loved ones were taken away from them.
I still try to take in the scent of my son, from his room, his blankets, and his bed. I haven't touched his room at all.
How far has the country come in giving these families the answer they so deserve on why the accident happened and who is responsible? The ruling and opposition parties have still been unable to come to an agreement over a special law on the Sewol-ho accident aimed at uncovering the cause.
The whole nation has been asking for a new Korea, but the Park Geunhye administration has not been able to take a single step forward since the disaster.
Using the suffering from the Sewol-ho disaster for political gains dishonors the victims and hurts the victims' families.
Demanding progress on the bill, some victims' families have gone on hunger strikes and days-long marches. The massive manhunt for the practical owner of the Sewol-ho ferry, Yu Byung-eun, ended in vain when it was confirmed earlier this week that his heavily decomposed body was found last month. Taking responsibility over the failure to catch the fugitive shipping tycoon, the senior prosecutor in charge of the investigation, Choi Jae-kyung, offered to resign. Prosecutors also revealed that Yu was hiding behind an upstairs wall in one of his villas in the south of the country, and that investigators had searched the building while he was presumably there. The revelations are only adding to the growing distrust of the prosecution, which has funneled massive financial resources into the investigation to no avail. Down in Pyeongmokhang Harbor at the site of the accident, search operations continue for the 10 victims that remain unaccounted for. 294 people have been confirmed dead. Yurian, Arirang News.
More than 80% of the victims of the ferry sinking were high school students on their way for a field trip to Korea's southern Jeju Island.
Confused by the crew's misleading instructions, only 75 of the 325 students aboard the ferry survived. In this very special report, our Song Ji-sun tells us of how those 75 have been coping with.
The road to recovery for the 75 surviving students of the Sewol-ho ferry tragedy continues. After the disaster on April 16th, the students were treated at the same hospital and have been going through group therapy sessions together since. And 1 month ago, on June 25th, they returned to classes at Taiwan High School. Before the tragedy, the class of 2016 was made up of 10 different classes, which has now been reduced to 4. They now study in makeshift classrooms that were originally used as music or art rooms. The homerooms they used before April 16th have been left intact, preserved to honor the memories of those that perished. Their curriculum is different as well. Therapy sessions are held throughout the week, and 10 counselors are available on campus to help the students if and when they need it. To ensure privacy, media outlets are banned from filming the students or their classes.
We do not want any more attention from the public or media. Please refrain from filming or interviewing us.
But some are speaking out, urging people to remember their friends and to put pressure on the government to carry out a thorough investigation of the disaster.
Please do not forget April 16, 2014, the moment you forget about the Sewol-ho ferry disaster. That's when our futures vanish.
While the junior class at Taiwan High School was the most affected by the tragedy, it's touched the lives of everyone there. For senior students prepping for college, it's been hard to study. To provide support, the National Assembly's Educational Committee approved a bill last week that expands the quota for college admissions for those affected by the disaster. Some 500 Taiwan High School seniors and the siblings of the victims will be eligible. Song Ji-sun, Arirang News.
2 days of early voting for the July 30th by-elections begins Friday. The National Election Commission expects the early voter turnout to rest at about 6%, although it could be higher because 15 parliamentary seats are on the line. Early polling booths will open at 6 a.m. and close at 6 p.m. on Friday and Saturday. According to election law, the media is barred from broadcasting any new public opinion polls on the by-elections starting today. At the nation's top office, President Park Geunhye is expected to sit down with the governor of Tokyo in Seoul on Friday upon his request. Governor Yoichi Matsuzoe is in Seoul on a 3-day trip aimed at thawing frosty ties between Korea and Japan through what's called city-to-city diplomacy, but is garnering just as much attention for its timing. Bilateral relations remains tense amid historical and territorial differences. Now, this Friday's meeting will be the first between President Park and a Japanese politician since she took office early last year. The Korean president has yet to meet with her Japanese counterpart Shinzo Abe, who reportedly told Matsuzoe before he departed for Seoul about his desire to improve relations with Korea. A Japanese lawmaker says his country has not gone as far as it can toward resolving the unresolved matter of Korean women forced into sexual servitude by the Japanese military during World War II. The comments come amid renewed talks on that issue between Seoul and Tokyo. Our foreign affairs correspondent Hwang Sung-hee reports.
An 8-term Japanese lawmaker says Tokyo can do more to resolve the issue of Japanese military's wartime sexual enslavement of Korean women. At a Heritage Foundation forum in Washington on Wednesday, Takeo Kawamura of the ruling Liberal Democratic Party said Japan has been working to resolve the issue of the so-called comfort women and that it is willing to deal with this. Kawamura added Japan could take the same measures it had done in the past for the 55 surviving Korean victims. These may include providing a letter of apology for the comfort women and some financial compensation from a civilian-led fund. The offer for such civilian-led compensation was rejected by South Korea in the 1990s, as Seoul saw it as the Japanese government's attempt to avoid direct responsibility. Kawamura's remarks come after South Korea and Japan resumed talks on Tokyo's sexual slavery in Seoul on Wednesday, the first such meeting since Japan went back and reviewed its 1993 Kono Statement, which apologized to the so-called comfort women. The Abe administration, while upholding the landmark statement, claimed last month that Seoul was in close consultation with Tokyo when it was being drawn up. Around 200,000 women, mostly Korean, were forced to serve the Japanese military in the early 20th century. But killing any anticipation for concrete progress between the two neighbors, Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshihide Suga expressed regret over Seoul's reaction. During a press briefing Wednesday, Suga said the review was conducted in an objective manner by experts. Suga added Japan has no plans for new measures to solve the comfort women issue. Hwang Sung-hee, Arirang News.
Over in Taiwan, a passenger plane crashed near the runway on its second emergency landing attempt, killing dozens on board. On this Thursday, the leaders of China and Taiwan put their political differences aside to express their deepest condolences. Our Connie Kim has the story.
A Taiwanese passenger plane crashed Wednesday evening local time, killing at least 48 people and injuring 10 others on board amid stormy weather as it attempted to make an emergency landing at Megong Airport on Penghu Island. The Trans-Asia Airways turboprop was flying from Taiwan's southwestern Kaohsiung International Airport to Penghu Island off the west coast, carrying 58 passengers and crew on board. Struggling to cope with bad weather conditions brought on by Typhoon Matmo, the plane crashed on its second attempt to land at the airport. The Taiwanese government says the 10 passengers who survived the crash have been taken to the hospital.
Apart from the people who were sent to the hospitals, the remaining passengers probably died. The fire department just told me that, but we still have to verify the details.
The president of Trans-Asia Airways expressed deep sorrow over the accident.
I solemnly apologize to everyone. I apologize for this unfortunate event.
The crashed plane had been in service for 13 years, and the pilot had more than 20 years of experience and about 23,000 flying hours. Taiwan's Aviation Safety Council is investigating whether the weather conditions or human error caused the accident. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
We've had 4 straight days of monsoon rain here in Korea, and I believe more is on the way.
Well, for details, let's turn to our Michelle Park at the Weather Center. Michelle?
Good evening, Kanyang and Daniel. The on and off rain continues here in Seoul, and currently it's off, but we're expecting heavy rain later this evening. And this nationwide rain is expected all throughout the week until Saturday. However, there is rain in the forecast on Sunday for Jeju Island. Now, tomorrow we're expecting heavier rain compared to the last few days due to the influence of Typhoon Matmo, and the central region will get worst of it, up to 30 millimeters of precipitation per hour at times. Now, a regional torrential rain warning is in effect as well, so try to stay indoors if possible. And for those of you on the roads, please be extra careful. Now, going over to our tomorrow's readings, Seoul will start off the Friday morning at 22 and reach up to 29 in the afternoon. Meanwhile, the southern cities such as Daegu and Busan will peak up to 31 and 29 degrees. Now moving over to other regions, Jeju Island will top out at 32, Dokdo hits 28, while Mankyonggang tops to 26. Well, that's all for now. I'm Michelle Park, and back to you guys.
Thanks, Michelle, for that. And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Now, April 16th, 2014, we will never forget and try to improve from that.
Well, this has been Daniel Che. Thank you for watching. Do tune in for more news updates coming up later on Arirang TV.